Hello guys, welcome back to another NEA video. So today we're going to go through the analysis section. So I'm sure a lot of you guys have been waiting for this one. So yeah, let's just jump straight into it. So here's the same disclaimer I've showed you as my last NEA videos. Yeah, just take a pause, read it again if you like. And in the previous videos, I gave you guys a checklist. But for analysis, it's quite tricky because it's quite hard to put a number on how much analysis you need to do. So I haven't made anything. I haven't given you any numbers on how many graphs you need to analyze. Instead, I'll just teach you how to analyze using some of my examples. And so the main theme for today, before we begin, is, as you can see, is to link back to your investigation. I'm gonna be honest with you guys. How many times have I said link in the past few videos? Please link back to your investigation. You will not get marked if you don't link it back. How is your data analysis relevant? You need to think of your NEA like a pie. This is a really bad example, but all the ingredients need to come together in order to make the pie. You can't just take a slice and call it a pie. Okay? You need to keep on. So your investigation just needs to link to each other and be cohesive. It should be cohesive and just link back to each other. And yeah, so here's all the data presentations I used. I got quite a few emails actually on my business email. I'll show you my business email at the end of the video if you have queries. And yeah, I wouldn't put a set number of data presentations you need. Instead, I would just say use a diverse range. And yeah, as long as you don't spam the same three pie charts or two line graphs, it's all good. And yeah, don't dwell on it too much. And here's just some examples. So some GIS graphs, line graph, bar chart, word cloud, pie chart. Yeah, that's quite a lot already. Just use a diverse range. So the step one on analyzing. So for me, it would be to identify what type of data is your data presentation showing. So if it's quantitative data, you'll need a more data heavy based approach. If it's qualitative data, you'll need to reference to more studies and think a bit more complex. It's not too bad, but I'll show you later. So for quantitative data, there's a quite easy approach. I would say is the easiest section to approach. So number one, just read it. General overview of how to use method and how you turned your data into a graph. And make sure you give the second part is the most important in my opinion. You gotta give key figures about your graph, hard data about your graph. So this could include the gradient, range, mean, median, mode. Think about maths. This is how you analyze quantitative data. And the also very important step would be to link back. So think about what your hard data shows. What does the gradient show? What does the range of data highlight? And then you got to think about what does this show actually about your investigation. So here's my example analysis where I've taken from two sets of data on two roads where I've used to highlight inequalities for. And keynote, guys, I used Microsoft Excel for most of my graphs. But yeah, so just use Microsoft Excel, play around with it. That's what I did. So you just play around with it and make some cool stuff. And if it looks good, put it in your NEA. And yeah, here's my example analysis but on quantitative data on these two graphs. And yeah, so step one, as I said before, give general overview of how to use the method and how to turn it into a graph and why you've done it. So yeah, so how did I make my graph? I took 10 samples. Yep, so just a short explanation of what the graph shows. And yeah, and I talked about how data from this can be compiled to form bar charts. Very simple, literally a little paragraph here. Doesn't have to be complex. Now, step two, talk about your hard data. And here, initially, I gave you guys the range of data. I talked about the range of data, 6 to 25 and 0 to 19 here. And the second part of this is to show what the range shows. So I talked about the range of data, um, sorry, the range of data being 19. Okay, so the range of data being 19, and both of them are the same, which highlights the same inconsistency in maintaining environmental quality. It's very simple, guys. As in, you just gotta think about what the actual hard data shows. It doesn't really require much. And yeah, I give another example here. So I talked about the gradient. So one gradient was positive, one gradient was negative. What does this show? So if you look here, I talked about how on one graph, so I'll just take it here, one graph, environmental quality decreases on transect A as the further along you go, and on transect B, environmental quality actually increases. So yeah, so what does this show? Okay, I just talked about that, and then so yeah, if you're lazy, talk about the mathematical stuff like range, median, mode, and then talk L gradient, and then talk about what it represents. That's very simple. Now, here's a key point before I get to the other part of my analysis. You need to link. I've already told you guys this, but a very common mistake was people disregarding other sections of your NEA during analysis. Let me just tell you something, guys. Now, let me tell you guys something now. You did not go through the trouble of writing your introduction, lit review, everything else, your hypothesis, just for you to not talk about it again. You've done all the hard work up until now. Don't disregard it, okay? And yeah, link your analysis to your theories. How does your data fit into your models, and what does it show? Link back to your hypothesis. Does your data analysis back your hypothesis and how your investigation will play out? And yeah, your investigation should be linked completely. It should be a cohesive piece of work, okay, guys? And yeah, as I said this before, you don't go through the effort of writing the stuff just to not use it again. Yeah, so before I move on how to analyze different stuff, you need to link your analysis back to an investigation. I'll show you how to do it. So just for context, I analyzed on this section, but I have yet to link it back to my investigation. Okay, so this is the same thing. I've analyzed these two graphs and what it shows, and now I need to link it back to my investigation. Just take a pause, read the paragraph, and think about how many times I've linked back to my investigation. So first of all, I've outlined the significance of proving contrast, okay, in the two graphs. And then here, notice why is proving a contrast in the environment relevant? I link back to my theory I mentioned in my intro in the Kuznets curve. Yeah, and then I talk about if environmental quality, what's it called? Environmental quality differs, then so will economic development levels. Okay, that's already a one link back. And then I made another line saying well-being levels will also differ. Okay, and then I referenced a paper that said what's it called, economic development and well-being are very linked. And then notice here the language I used to link this back even further, guys. Link. What am I doing, guys? Keep on linking, please. And yeah, I linked this to my hypothesis again. My hypothesis was that there was an inequality on both the streets. And then notice how again I used another what's it called? Another link again. And I linked back to my comparative study where I talked about Kensington, borough of Kensington and Chelsea, and how inequalities lead to differing well-beings and deprivation levels. I linked it back again, guys. Why is what I did relevant? Why is my analysis relevant? And then I talked about yeah, the contrast between the streets, and yeah, I talked about how I proved there was, first of all, guys, just for context, I proved there was a contrast in environment. By proving a contrast in environment, I proved that there were differing economic levels due to my theory, which I linked back to, and then I talked about my hypothesis. This I talked about how this backed up my hypothesis, and then I linked back to my comparative case study to show that it will play out roughly the same way. So yeah, the main idea is to link vigorously. Just keep on linking, guys, please. And yeah, another good way of backing up your analysis is using a stats test. So your stats test uses hard data, and it's a proven method that you can back your data up and your analysis. And don't overthink this section as there's maths involved. A lot of people fell into the trap. Oh, I need to do a bit of maths. It's going to be very hard. No, it's not. You literally just slap stuff in calculators. And yeah, add a stats test. Definitely add a stats test. Ask a teacher if you're unsure of your data. And for context, I did a student's t-test, which I will show you later. And here's my stats test. So to do a stats test, my first thing would be to introduce why you're doing a stats test. So I said my evidence suggests there's a contrast, but there was no hard data to back it up. Okay, so that's why I use a t-test. And then yeah, ignore the mathematical symbols, guys. Again, let me tell you something now. It looks confusing now, but you honestly, guys, just put it in a calculator. You don't actually have to understand what's going on. I did A level maths. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know what things represented, but you just have to do it really. And then yeah, just don't deep the maths. Just think this will be useful. Okay, this will be very useful. And yeah, how to complete stats tests. Introduce what your stats test will do. Outline your hypotheses. Null hypothesis is the one you want to reject, whilst alternative is the one you want to accept. Okay. Again, don't dwell on it too much. Ask your teacher for help. Do the mathematical analysis to work out stuff like your critical value and mention your degrees of freedom. And again, guys, you don't need to understand what is going on. I did A level maths. I didn't understand what was going on half the time. I just put in a calculator and I kind of know what it meant and what represented. And yeah, here again, non-maths takers, please don't dwell on it. When I was in class, a lot of people were like, "Oh, how do I square root stuff? What does this actually mean?" Okay, just ask your teacher. You don't need to dwell on it, please. This is just a key theme I've seen in the stats test. Don't dwell on it too much. You just need to know what the conclusion is. Okay, and after you've done your stats test, you need to make conclusions about it. So here I've explained what the stats test showed and proved. That should be your first paragraph. And don't worry if the stats test doesn't back up your hypothesis. And notice again how I link back to my um, theory of my Kuznets curve in figure 1.2. Again, link. And yeah, this will just give you a little conclusion of what your stats test shows. And to get higher marks, what I did also talked about, what some people didn't do, is talk about the flaws of your stats test. So if you just read the second paragraph here, I talked about why my stats test was flawed and potentially why it didn't work. So yeah, so I went for a more maths based approach on why my t test was very flawed. Yeah, here you see I talked about t tests usually work with normally distributed data, which mine was not. And yeah, so just keep on talking. Just talk about your flaws as well. This will give you a few extra marks, I think. Not a few extra marks, but it just shows you a lot more academic. And here's a key part, guys. I talked about why a conclusion cannot be drawn to answer first sub question purely on the stats test. Because I mentioned how because the stats test was flawed, I can't make a conclusion like just based on this alone. So that's why I need more qualitative approaches. So you guys can always mention the qualitative as quantitative argument throughout. So I talked about why I can't just base my whole conclusion based on this one little stats test. It's because I only use quantitative data. So therefore, I would need more qualitative data approaches to confirm my findings. Your stats test shouldn't be the thing that solidifies anything. It should just be able to like because in the NEA your conclusion is quite hard to come by. There's a lot of like little anomalies and a lot of stuff you find that may not back up your data. So yeah, just say a little key tip I have for you guys is say, oh, the conclusion can't be drawn because my data is flawed. That's a very simple thing to talk about, and this will set you up and be like, oh, I need more qualitative approaches. So I will need more qualitative approaches to for my data analysis before I come to a conclusion, which I talked about here. So yeah, before making a final judgment, I need more qualitative methods. Talk about that. And yeah, we're going to move on to qualitative data and how to analyze it. So here's two examples here. And yeah, as I said before, it's hard. Analyzing qualitative is harder than quantitative, but yeah, I'll discuss some stuff that helped me, and there's no direct ways of doing things. So here's one method I use to analyze qualitative data. So reading the title, I should have made this less confusing, but you can convert your qualitative data into like a maths-based approach, and yeah, you can do this by using percentages, talk about the percentage of people that wanted something, blah, blah, stuff like that. I'll show you. And yeah, I'll show you how to use my methods in this data presentation. Just read it and understand what's going on. So for context, I did a interview of asking residents in my area what they wanted to see in the future. And then I color coded them into categories such as retail reforms, transport improvements, and parking reforms. Yeah, and I just made a little, it's a very simple graph, not graph even, just a little, I don't even know what this is, but yeah, just a data presentation. So implementing method one, which is a more mathematical based approach. So notice here how even though this is all just words, I converted it into saying majority of residents, 60% wanted retail reforms. Again, guys, you can always convert this type of data into like percentages, and I just gave a key overview of what was going on. So I talked about percentage of residents that wanted retail reforms, that want so 60% wanted retail reforms, 20% wanted parking reforms, and 50% wanted transport improvements. So you just got to explain briefly what the data shows, and now you can link back to an investigation. So what does the data show? So I said the main problems that exist today are retail, transport, and parking. Just link it back, okay, guys. What are the problems? Like, what do you want to get out of your interview? And yeah, and here's a keynote I have on the top. This method applied to qualitative data is a good starting point. You should not just use this method throughout. This next step would be to link back to your theories and other intro and stuff like that. Here's a key point I want to tell you guys. So I'm telling you guys these methods to analyze data, but I would say you need to use multiple methods. You can't just keep on spamming this method again to analyze data. Okay, you gotta use a mix. Yeah, this is just a great starting point. I would say this is not like a great way of analyzing. It's just a good starting point. So you can just transform all of this into like percentages and stuff. So it's a good starting point. It's a good intro paragraph for how you analyze it. And now you have to use a different method, which I'll show you now. Hey guys, so the second method is called zooming in and out. It's quite an obvious method. You've probably done it before. You just don't like call it zooming in and out. But yeah, as well as the statistic heavy approach, which I showed you here, which is a great starting point, guys. It's a good starting point, but it's not something you should use throughout. You should zoom into specific sections of your data. It's very obvious, but you gotta focus on high areas of interest. Like yeah, this could be a prominent theme or even anomalies. So yeah, these can be just areas of high interest. Give you more to talk about. So just talk about them, guys. So here's an example of my zooming in and out method. So I talked about within the 60% that wanted retail reforms. Like, notice how most people wanted retail reforms. So talk about it. I talked about yeah, zooming on two sample points. I talked about those contrasting viewpoints within my data. So again, I zoomed in on the retail reforms, and then I zoomed in on samples 1 and 9. And then I talked about here I talked about a contrast. There's a contrast, and what does this contrast show? So yeah, so I talked about whilst one sample wanted more chain companies, the other wanted less chain companies, and how does this link back to my investigation? Here, I link back to my investigation by linking back to my theory, my clone town theory, which I mentioned in my introduction. And what does this show? It shows that clone town theory perhaps is not the biggest problem. So, just for context, guys, clone town theory is just when a high street becomes saturated with chain companies like McDonald's, Subway, blah blah blah. And I painted the clone town theory as a negative thing, but here I said that because there's a contrast between two sample points, perhaps it's not such a negative factor in the clone town theory. And then here again, I named another link. The findings confirmed. The finding confirms the ideas highlighted by figures 1.13 and 1.14. And yeah, I talked about perhaps it backs up my theory. My theory is one of my theories is Clinton theory, and I talked about there's an increasing dependence on chain stores for Leatherhead, which was my area. And then if you just read it through, I talk about unsustainability, the local economy will lose power, and then let's say again, this can be linked back. Guys, I don't know how many times I showed you the word link today, but I'm sure you guys understand now. I link back to my case study of Scotland, where the decline of companies within primary and secondary industries has led to the Scottish economy shrinking. I talked about how because there's a because there's exuding similarities between my what's called comparative study, perhaps Leatherhead will experience the same if the adopted chain companies fail. I talked about an over dependence. So just for a little context again, I talked about an over dependence on chain companies, and this will lead to this will lead to a decline in economy, just like Scotland did in, I don't know, post World War I or World War II, I forgot. And yeah, I'm linking again. Like, honestly, guys, as stated within the introduction, look at the language I'm using. I'm always referencing some form of previous section, and yeah, you just gotta keep on linking, guys, please. And here again, the problem poses. This problem poses for the officials in charge of the Transform Leatherhead scheme is that the specialization of plans towards a single demographic would isolate other age categories and create a large divide in happiness levels. Okay, guys. So for context again, let me show you the happiness level graph. So this is I showed you here. This is my happiness level graph. I'll also link back to other data presentations. Like, I don't know what more I can tell you guys to link, but yeah, you need to link, guys. Just read it through it and notice how many links I've done. So here I give you the full example. Just read it, and all the data analysis is based on this graph which I've just shown you in previous slides. And just take a pause and read it. Honestly, I cannot stress to you how many times I need to link back to the investigation, and how many times I always start my paragraphs and my analysis by mentioning some form of maths, like percentages, and then I zoom in and out of different data sets or different subcategories. And here's another keynote: don't look at analysis and each presentation and analysis in isolation. Always think about how you can link different data presentations to one another to disprove or back a point. Like, I'm gonna be honest with you guys, I'm getting bored of saying link to you guys, but there's a common mistake I saw everyone do was after you've done a data presentation, analyzed it, again, you've just ignored it for the later sections. You always gotta link it back. Think about how each data will back up each one. And yeah, so just to give you a little more insight, you could potentially link why is this one road, so why is a word cloud describing a street linked to happiness levels? Perhaps I'm just giving you examples what you could do. Why is higher EQA scores, why the EQA scores here gonna lead to a word cloud such as this one? This is just some examples. And yeah, link between your data presentations as well as your intro sections. Yeah, and here is I zoomed in on the section where I talked about the happiness levels. I literally linked, sorry, where did I go? Sorry. I linked, yeah, I linked everything again. I linked this section, I linked this data presentation to my happiness levels. And yeah, and it's followed through. And the idea of contrast and divide is followed through from the EQA results, which is these. Is this graph, which I showed you all the way at the start. So notice how in one analysis, I linked three different data presentations together. That's what you need to do, guys. All right, so moving on, we're going to talk about anomalies, which is a high point of interest. And often a tempting thing to do with anomalies is just to ignore them, since it's irrelevant to your investigation and doesn't back up your point, which is a terrible thing to do. It's not good practice. What you should be doing instead is think that anomalies bring an opportunity to question your investigation, and this will give you more marks. I will show as it shows a large awareness of your study, and yeah, I'll show you some good ways to analyze anomalies. So my examples will be based on these two graphs. So just take a look at it. I'm just talking about happiness levels. So I have a pie chart here separating happiness levels of one being the unhappy, 10 being very happy. And yeah, I just drew a graph of frequency here and happiness level. So just pause it and just take a look at it to understand it a bit better. And yeah, so here's my analysis of it. And this is how I always use statistics to set the scene and create a general idea. So look here. Again, guys, this is like using that method I taught you guys earlier. The majority of interviewees scored the happiness levels in level 1, which makes up 36.7%. I always like putting the mathematical stuff first because it just sets the scene and everything. And yeah, again, I explained what it shows. So generally, the locals are feeling a lot more negatively than positively. And yeah, I mentioned although there are anomalies in the trend of one person ranking their happiness levels as 9, I talked about that as well. And yeah, I mentioned why looking at anomalies is valid because if you just look at, I talked about extreme values, looking at extreme values here, where my cursor is. Extreme values I pose as anomalies sometimes, and I gave a, what's it called, a reference. I've looked at a research paper, and it said that, it gave me a reason why looking at anomalies was correct, and I backed this up by referencing it, saying like, focusing on these anomalies is a good idea as well. And then yeah, I talked about it, and again, I did the gradient method, and I will explain it later. So yeah, guys, I'm definitely talking about anomalies. I mean, you're not going to get. Perhaps you might have a lot of anomalies, but I don't really have many anomalies in my data. There was just a general consensus that the area was really bad in my, which I studied. So yeah, just mention an anomaly, talk about why we're looking at it is valid, and yeah, I'm gonna move on to the next one. So here's a full example of one of my analysis that I'll give you. So a lot of you guys have been asking for my NEA. I'm gonna be honest with you guys. I literally given you my whole NEA throughout these videos, and yeah. So all my analysis will be based on this data presentation. So just for more context, this is a non-participant observation that I did, and yeah, I just noted all the observations I made into a word cloud in the area, and this is what came out. And yeah, I'll show you my whole analysis on the next slide. Yeah, so I haven't bullet pointed anything here. I haven't given you any notes, but it's the same thing again. I can just quickly go over this. Here again, I talked about what's it called. I just gave a brief overview of what I did, and I talked about my aim for this data presentation was to show the current demographic and to see if it's been successful in attracting certain demographics and focusing on the what's called the regeneration plans. And yeah, I linked it back to the regeneration plan's main target, and by looking at this graph here, I can infer if the plans have been successful in attracting the correct audience they wanted. And yeah, here again, I talked about I talked about the main observations. So in mathematical terms, that'll be the mode. So here, I should have mentioned this earlier, but the bigger the words, the more frequent it was in the area. And yeah, I referenced again back to the regeneration's main attempts and main goals. And yeah, there's just a lot of stuff going on here. Uh, this is just an example of what you could do. As in, obviously, it's quite hard to tell you how to analyze guys since everyone's NEA is really different. But yeah, and I just can't give you an exact way to analyze properly. I'm just giving you some few ideas. So just take a look at all of this, and I'm gonna move on to the next slide. Oh yeah, so yeah, here again, I talked about it. Keep on mentioning it, and also yeah, this is just one example of how to analyze. There's a lot more. And look again, especially as 8.4%, I mentioned this 8.4% of people in Lev had not Caucasians. This is from data I stated earlier in my introduction. Although it's not explicit, I do remember putting in my introduction. And again, I link back to Scotland. Like Scotland, guys, Scotland and Kensington and Chelsea were my main comparative studies in my literature review. And again, I linked it back. Linked it back. So it's not obvious here, but if you read my whole NEA, you realize that I would talk about Scotland and Kensington a lot. And yeah, let's just talk about it. And it's honestly, guys, it's quite hard to tell you guys how to analyze, but yeah, just take a look at it. I'll zoom in for you guys. You can pause it here. And yeah, so I'm gonna move on to the final slide. So I have some announcement. Yeah, so first of all, I'd like to apologize. My upload frequency has been very, very, very messed up. I've been very busy with like my work experiences and stuff. But yeah, good luck with the UCAS applications. It's peak application season, so good luck with that. If you've got a few offers already. And my next video, which will definitely be on the evaluation in the NEA, this will take a while. I'm gonna try to set my goal of putting out the video before November. It's not a promise, but I'll try. And this will take a while since evaluation was by far my largest section, and it's gonna be a two-part video probably, most likely. And yeah, again, if you want me to look over your work, give you some feedback on your NEA, my business email is open for any questions. And yeah, I have a new Insta social as well on the right. You can add it up. It's let me zoom in for you guys so you can see it. Yeah, I haven't touched the account for a while, but I'm in the process of like editing it. But yeah, just take a look at it. Appreciate if you could drop me a follow. And yeah, hopefully you guys do well and good luck. See you in the next one, man.